Imagine being so powerful that your company becomes the industry itself. No real competition, no serious threats, just total domination for nearly 100 years. That was Kodak. If you were alive in the 1900s, there's a terrifyingly high chance Kodak captured your life. Your childhood photos, your parents' wedding pictures, your vacations, your birthdays, your memories. Kodak was everywhere. At its peak, the company controlled almost the entire photography industry. The cameras, the film, the photo paper, the development labs. With over 140,000 employees and $16 billion in revenue in its heyday, Kodak wasn't just winning the market, it was the market. And then, it collapsed. Not because people stopped taking photos. In fact, humanity was taking more photos than ever before. Kodak died because of something far more terrifying. The company invented the future, and then refused to believe in it. This is the rise and fall of Kodak. The story begins in the late 1800s. Back then, photography was horrible. Not bad quality horrible, but horrible in a complicated sense. Taking a single photograph required giant cameras, fragile glass plates, chemicals, technical knowledge, and an insane amount of patience. Photography wasn't something normal people did for fun. It was a scientific process. Only professionals and wealthy people could really afford it. And because of that, capturing memories was rare. But one man looked at this complicated industry and saw an opportunity hiding inside it. His name was George Eastman. And unlike everyone else, Eastman understood something powerful. People hate complexity. Most people didn't care how photography worked. They just wanted memories. Pictures of their family, their travels, their happiest moments. So Eastman asked a question that would change history forever. What if photography was easy? That single idea became Kodak. Eastman began simplifying the entire process. He replaced massive glass plates with flexible film rolls, made cameras smaller, cheaper, portable, and suddenly, photography escaped the studio and entered everyday life. But Kodak's true genius wasn't just the technology, it was psychology. Because George Eastman understood something most inventors didn't. If people are confused, they won't buy. So Kodak created one of the greatest marketing slogans ever written. You press the button, we do the rest. That line changed everything. It removed fear, removed complexity, removed friction. People no longer needed to understand photography. Kodak handled everything. You just captured the moment, and the world became obsessed. Kodak exploded across America, and then across the planet. Families bought Kodak cameras. Tourists carried Kodak film. Children grew up surrounded by the brand. Photography became emotional, and Kodak owned the emotion. But behind the scenes, Kodak had secretly built something even more powerful than cameras, a money printing machine. Because the real genius of Kodak's business model wasn't selling cameras, it was selling film. See, Kodak often sold cameras cheaply, sometimes barely making profit. Because the real money came afterward. Every single photo required film, and every roll of film eventually needed development. Meaning Kodak didn't just make money once, they made money forever. Every birthday, every vacation, every memory. More photos meant more film sales. More film sales meant more profits. It was one of the greatest recurring revenue models in business history. And for decades, it worked perfectly. Kodak became unstoppable. By the mid-1900s, the company dominated photography so completely that people genuinely believed Kodak would last forever. And honestly, that belief made sense. At one point, Kodak controlled nearly 90% of film sales in America. Think about how insane that is. Imagine one company controlling almost an entire global industry. That level of dominance is almost impossible today. Kodak became rich, powerful, comfortable, and that comfort slowly became dangerous. Because success changes companies. At first, companies innovate because they need to survive. But after dominating for too long, they begin protecting what already exists instead of creating what comes next. Kodak became emotionally attached to film. Film wasn't just a product anymore. Film was Kodak. And then, everything changed in 1975. Inside a Kodak laboratory, an engineer named Steven Sasson created something revolutionary. At first glance, it looked ridiculous. It was bulky, heavy, ugly. The image quality was terrible. But hidden inside this strange machine was the future. It was the world's first digital camera. No film, no chemicals, no photo development, just digital images stored electronically. Today that sounds normal, but in 1975, this invention was terrifying. Because Kodak instantly understood what it meant. If digital photography succeeded, film would die. And if film died, Kodak's entire empire would collapse. This was Kodak's impossible dilemma. The company had invented the future, but the future threatened its profits. And this is where Kodak made one of the most important mistakes in business history. Instead of fully embracing digital photography, Kodak hesitated. The company feared destroying its own film business. So internally, Kodak continued researching digital technology. But externally, they protected film. Because film was still generating billions of dollars. And that decision would haunt them forever. At first, Kodak's logic actually seemed smart. Digital cameras were terrible. The quality sucked. They were expensive, slow, clunky. Film still looked far better. Kodak believed digital photography would remain a niche product for tech enthusiasts. They thought most people would always prefer traditional photography. But Kodak underestimated one thing: human behavior. Because people don't always choose the best quality, they choose convenience. And digital photography was unbelievably convenient. No waiting, no film rolls, no development process. You could instantly see your photos, delete them, retake them, store thousands of them. That changed everything. And while Kodak hesitated, other companies attacked aggressively, especially Japanese electronics companies like Sony and Canon. Unlike Kodak, these companies weren't emotionally attached to film. They had nothing to lose. So they pushed digital technology forward at full speed. Every year, digital cameras became smaller, better, faster, cheaper. Meanwhile, Kodak was trapped in the middle, too afraid to kill film, too slow to dominate digital. It was the worst possible position, because technology doesn't wait for hesitation. And then came the final blow, the smartphone. This completely transformed photography forever, because suddenly, cameras were no longer separate devices. They lived inside everyone's pocket. Every human became a photographer overnight. People started taking photos constantly. Food, selfies, pets, random moments, everything. Humanity began taking billions of photos. Ironically, this should have been Kodak's world. Kodak invented the digital camera. They saw the future before almost anyone else. But psychologically, the company couldn't fully abandon the past. And this happens to far more businesses than people realize. Because the hardest thing in business isn't innovation. It's self-destruction. It's killing the thing that made you successful before someone else does. Most companies can't do it. Kodak couldn't either. The company kept trying to transition slowly, while the world changed rapidly. And markets are brutal. If you move too slowly, you die. By the early 2000s, Kodak's empire was collapsing. Film sales crashed. Photo development stores disappeared. Consumer behavior changed forever. The system that once made Kodak unbelievably rich became obsolete. And the terrifying part? Kodak saw it happening in real time. They weren't blind. They understood digital technology better than most companies. But to fully embrace digital photography meant destroying the very business model that made Kodak powerful. It was like asking a king to burn down his own kingdom before the enemy arrived. Most leaders psychologically cannot do that, because success creates attachment, and attachment destroys adaptation. Kodak became addicted to the old world, and while Kodak protected the past, other companies built the future. Then finally, in 2012, the unthinkable happened. Kodak filed for bankruptcy. A company that once dominated global photography was broken. One of the most powerful brands in the world, destroyed by the future it helped create. And honestly, that's what makes Kodak's story so terrifying. Kodak did almost everything right. They innovated. They dominated. They built one of the strongest brands in history. But they failed in one critical area: adaptation. Because in business, success can become dangerous. The more successful you become, the harder it becomes to change. Why? Because changing means risking everything that already works. And humans hate risking comfort. That's why Kodak's story is now taught in business schools all over the world. Not because Kodak lacked intelligence, but because Kodak proved something terrifying. Even the most powerful companies on Earth can collapse if they become too attached to the past. And honestly, this lesson applies far beyond business. Technology changes. Industries change. Human behavior changes. The world moves forward whether you are ready or not. And the companies that survive are usually not the strongest. They are the fastest adapters. That was Kodak's fatal mistake. They invented the future, but they were too afraid to fully live in it. And by the time they finally accepted reality, the world had already moved on. If you enjoyed this cinematic business documentary, subscribe for more stories about the rise and fall of the world's biggest companies, empires, billionaires, and industries. Because history doesn't just teach us how people succeed. Sometimes, it teaches us exactly how they collapse.